What's up everyone, Gotham Palladium here. This is going to be the Batman Arkham Dungeons tier list, and what do I mean by dungeons? I mean, you might have guessed, but the areas in each Arkham game that you can enter and really explore with puzzles, enemies, the narrative, and so on. Like the Penguin Iceberg Lounge or Stag's Airships. I found a tier list online. I'm going to link it in the description if you want to make your own, and yeah, I'm really excited to make this video because the Arkham games have a lot of awesome Metroidvania-esque designs that are really fun and memorable. A lot of these places have awesome moments and things of that nature. I'm going to be ranking these dungeons based on how well designed they are between the puzzles and areas to go into, as well as the narrative, like the story elements that play into the area, because I do think that makes a difference in these dungeons, so keep that in mind. And this video will be loosely ordered, like I'll just kind of put it in the order I think, but I won't dwell on it too much, so, you know, keep that in mind too. I think the tiers are all pretty self-explanatory, and just to preface this, I'm only ranking real dungeons, right? So I'm not ranking like the courthouse from Arkham City, because while you can go inside and explore, it's a very small area that's not like, you know, there's no real puzzles or an overarching narrative, and it's not that big at all. So if there's one that's missing that you notice on this list, that would be the reason. So, you know, just use common sense, I guess. We will go in order of when the games came out. So Asylum, City, Origins, and Night. And also, I'm going to be using Batman Arkham videos footage a lot here because he's the GOAT and it saves me time, and he really showcases these dungeons well. So shout out to him, and of course his link will be in the description. And also, right before we start, please subscribe, please. I'm trying to get to 100k before the end of the year. If you watch like more than 2 of my videos, please do so. And also, a lot of people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, so I guess I'm begging at this point. I don't know, that's what I'm doing, I guess. But I make content daily, so like, you know, I really appreciate it. You don't even have to like the video if you don't want to, just subscribe. Give me a chance, please. But let's start the video. Okay, so Arkham Asylum first. The first place we're going to be talking about is the intensive treatment area. Now, the intensive treatment sets a very good tone for the rest of this game going forward. You start the game going through narrow corridors and kind of exploring what it has to offer, and the thing with the intensive treatment as well as Asylum in general is that this game's dungeons felt a lot more maze-like, with different intersecting hallways and things of that nature. Now, I think for being the very first dungeon that serves as a tutorial dungeon for the game, it does a good job. I mean, you kind of feel what the game offers by exploring these little hallways, and then it leads you to a little boss fight with a Titan enhanced guy, and you get introduced to things like the grappling mechanic when you have to climb up this broken elevator shaft after Harley destroys it because she's an annoying asshole. The Predator room is unique as well. I think this layout is great for tutorial area, and overall, I think everything is put together pretty well here. As far as story goes, it really just introduces you to characters like Joker, Harley, even Riddler. Since it is the beginning, it's not too much to just amaze you, right? And while you do come back here later on in the story to access other areas of the game, it's not much story-wise that adds either in that element really. It's memorable for being the first though, since it is kind of a tutorial area, but it doesn't do much really to go above and beyond, at least for me. And while it does establish the game's tone really well, I wouldn't put it in Batson tier. For me, I'd put it in DCAMU tier. It's not terrible. Not amazing to me though, but it is good, and I think it's perfect for a tutorial area like I said a million times, and it does well on showing you how to control Batman. If this dungeon was late in the game, I'd probably put it in mid tier, but since it is the beginning like I said a million times, it's going in pretty good tier. Next up, the medical facility. I really like it. The really awesome things about the medical facility is not more so about the layout and design on the area itself, but the story here. There's a lot of great story beats this area introduces. First of all, you get the famous Gordon is dead scene with Scarecrow introducing himself as the first time he messes with your head. On top of that, this is where you find Bane, and it shows the pain he went through going through the process of being Dr. Young's guinea pig. There are some really interesting story sections here that really push the narrative, especially with Bane as you ask yourself what the hell is going on. But aside from the story, what about the layout? The layout, I'd say, is solid. It's the first time I think where you really feel like Batman's sneaking around inside a building, right? Like, you have to access the area through the roof first, crawl through these vents, and then take down a Predator room to save some employees. It's pretty cool. It then leads into a part of the building with narrow hallways with different paths you gotta take to save different people. And as far as that goes, there's not really much else. I mean, the thing about Arkham Asylum's dungeons were that since it was the first game, I really think that it gets overshadowed by the more theatrical ones later on in the series. But I think as far as this one goes, I do like it more than Intensive Treatment, but I wouldn't put it in awesome tier, at least for me personally. So I'd put it above Intensive Treatment here in the same DCAMU tier. Great story beats, but but it's a pretty standard layout design for a medical facility. I still like it though. Next up, we got the sewers in the game. Now the sewers are kind of meh to me. Now the sewers has one of the most memorable sections in the game, don't get me wrong, with Killer Croc's horror section of course, which is really awesome, but besides that, it's really just used as a way to traverse from one section of the game to another. The Batcave in the game is pretty much a part of the sewer system, which is cool, but you don't really do anything in there besides get some gadgets. There's a neat little climbing section, I guess, as well, with this whole steam pump system with its own predator and combat sections. And as far as story beats go, it is cool seeing Scarecrow get wasted, but even with all these things, I don't think it offers too much as a dungeon, so to speak. You do spend a lot of time here, and like I said, it does have an awesome Killer Croc section, but if you take away that section, this area would probably be dog water to me, you know what I mean? I think for all these reasons, the sewers in this game are pretty mid. I personally don't really look forward to this part, it's just kind of filler, especially since it takes away from the spectacle that is the Arkham Island and the awesome design of it, since now you have to go under it. I don't know, this section wasn't for me, and because of that, I think it isn't Rocksteady's Bane tier. Anyone else really excited for the Marvel vs. Capcom collection? Just give us Marvel 4 already. Now next up on a Dungeons tier list, the Arkham Mansion. Now the Arkham Mansion I actually really like. It might be my favorite dungeon in this game. As far as layouts go, I think it's pretty cool. Traversing from like the top of the building to enter the building was really awesome, and while the layout of the building isn't too heavily reliant on puzzles and realistically it doesn't have much of it, what it does offer is something that feels fresh with a different kind of color scheme we saw from previous dungeons, giving you a change of scenery as well as pretty amazing story beats. For one, the Scarecrow section here is my favorite. The death of Bruce Wayne's parents here might be my favorite interpretation simply because of this one part right here. That bat shadow makes this whole section go so hard, and on top of that, one of the most arguably important story beats in the entire series happens in this game with Dr. Young, the creator of Titan, dying. This section offers a big advancement as far as story goes, and on top of all of that, the layout is simple yet effective. There are some puzzle sections that do require you to use your brain, like the library section for example, where you have to drop this giant chandelier thing onto the glass, as well as traversing through the vents and having to track down Dr. Young's notes using Batman's detective skills and stuff. That's all really neat. I think as far as dungeons go, this one was a breath of fresh air for me in this game, and coming back here later on in the story when Poison Ivy completely destroys it makes traversing it a bit different, and it's really cool in that regard. I think as far as dungeons go, this one is like my personal favorite from the game, and because of that, I am putting it in Pattinson tier. Now moving on, we have the Penitentiary. Now the Penitentiary is really awesome. I think as far as any dungeons in this game goes, this one encapsulates how much of a crappy facility Arkham Asylum really is. Arkham Asylum is known to have this claustrophobic atmosphere, and I think this section really highlights that element. You enter into this place with an electric floor and really narrow rooms filled with cells that are full of these straight up insane inmates. These cell blocks have you on your toes as you navigate through them, just waiting for some random crazy inmate to come out of nowhere to try and kill you. And I think as far as atmosphere and claustrophobia goes, I think this section is the best at that. In regards to the layout, pretty much every room here is really narrow, but as puzzles and problem solving go, it's not too difficult and it's pretty standard. There's not much here to confuse you, and as far as story goes, things happen, like finding Quincy Sharp and stopping Harley, and also starting off Poison Ivy's story. All that's pretty cool, but it's nothing monumental, I'd say. It's more so set up to advance the story. So as far as story and design layouts go, it's pretty standard, but I really do like the feeling of this area as well as the enemies here raising the hairs on your head. I say this is like the higher end of DCAMU tier. If it had a more engaging puzzle design and perhaps a better narrative, it would be higher, but I feel comfortable putting it here. Next up and final for Arkham Asylum actually is the Botanical Gardens. Now I think the Botanical Gardens is really cool. This dungeon is like the final real dungeon of the game, and it really puts everything together. There are neat puzzles like having to find a way to get past this electrified water or traversing around this rundown section here. As far as predator sections go, it's really unique as you have to take down the guy at the end of this room first so he doesn't alert and kill the hostages, making you plan out your way of getting to him without getting seen. It's really cool, and we never get a section like this again in this series, which really kind of sucks. On top of all that, you get a more difficult predator section in the beginning with the layout being a little bit more complicated. And as far as stories go, it's all about Poison Ivy and her boss fight, and in my opinion, it was really cool. I liked it, but the build-up was really awesome too. The way you had to come back to fight her, she starts taunting you with her vines like she's telling you to come follow her and stuff. It's really neat, and the way she screams in pain as you take out these spore spawns is awesome too. I really like this area of the game, and it really felt just like a classic Batman going in to defeat one of his villains and calling it a day kind of thing. It had that vibe to it, and I really like this section, and for that, I'm putting it in Pattinson tier. I like this one. And there you go. So far, those are how I feel about Arkham Asylum's dungeons. Honestly, overall, they're pretty good. Like, I like them, but they're definitely not my favorites overall, and that may be due to the other games going way more theatrical with some of the dungeons and how the story just goes up to 100 sometimes, but yeah. Let's move on to the next Batman Arkham game, Patrick Bateman Arkham City. Cool, now let's just jump into the first dungeon you explore, the Steel Mill. And yes, I'm including the Steel Mill section and the second section where you explore from the back pause later on in the game just to make things organized here. So factoring all that in, I think the Steel Mill was awesome. The thing I really like about it is that I think it amps up more of that Metroidvania puzzle design compared to Arkham Asylum. When you first enter this place, you go through the chimney and you have to navigate through this hot area and go through the underground floor grates to get inside. You have to sneak around these guys and take on this Predator room to save this doctor, and once you do all that, you go back and figure out how to get inside Joker and Harley's room up here. This is like the first basic tutorial dungeon in the game, but I think it's really well done. And once you get back here, it's like better. You have to access the area from the back later in the game, and these sections in the back here are really awesome in terms of puzzle design. Like using the line launcher to navigate around here, or using the freeze pellet to pull you across the water while dodging obstacles. Having to open this door by throwing a remote controlled battering, like it's kind of challenging you in a way. And on top of all that, there's a secret area. I mean, it's not secret because it's kind of a side mission, but the area where you have to go get the freeze grenade upgrade, that part is just more puzzle design, which is cool. I think the Steel Mill is a really hefty, fun area. And the story is pretty good. You get the iconic Joker scene. It's a really good setup story-wise. And overall, it's just great. I think the Steel Mill is Battinson's here. I really liked it. Now, next up, we have the Penguins Museum. Now, the Penguins Museum, or the Iceberg Lounge, is the first to go into the Kevin Conroy tier. I absolutely love this area. Now, when I was talking about the first theatrical-esque dungeon, this is what I was talking about. A giant shark in the middle of the room that you have to look out for. And before that, you have a nice intro with the dinosaur coming out of nowhere, introducing you to this whole museum. And what's even better is that the Penguin decorates it with classic little Arkham Easter eggs and things like the Scarface puppy here. It's nice. The layout is nice leading up to the classic shark room. You have to do a little bit of puzzle solving to get to it, and you get this awesome cage fight where these guys are locked in a room with Batman. It really is cool. And then you get to the famous Tiny the Shark area where you have to slowly traverse this ice so you don't fall and get eaten. And then you gotta figure out which room to go to first and what order you need to go through them in order to progress. And as you do that, you get some pretty awesome story beats, I'd say, with Mr. Freeze being held captive, using his upgrade to stop Penguin, and then a complete surprise with Solomon Grundy at the end. You get 3 new villains in the series not shown previously right here, and they're all used really well in my opinion. The layout is really well done here too. The puzzles, while not extremely difficult, are there, and this area having really its own self-contained, pretty engaging story to progress through made it really shine for me. For that, it's going in Kevin Conroy's tier. I like this dungeon a lot. It might be my favorite one from this game for sure. Now next up is the sewers that lead up to Ra's al Ghul's hideout. Now this one, the sewers are kind of hard because the underground section can be ranked by itself, but I chose not to do that because you go through the underground for a couple of sections of the game. One for Ra's al Ghul and another for Wonder City. So I'm going to rank the underground sections differently in these two aspects if that makes sense. I mean, you do also go through it to stop the Penguin comm disruptor, but I didn't include that because I didn't want to make things too complicated here. But I'll talk about the underground sections for Ra's al Ghul and the Wonder Tower missions because they're bigger and more important, right? Okay, so for the sewer / Ra's al Ghul dungeon area, I think it's really good. There's a lot here that shows a really important level of good level design in my opinion that should be highlighted. The sewers offer a design similar to Arkham Asylum in that it's pretty narrow, but I think it does it better here. The sewer system is cool, and I like that it leads you back to the room where you stopped the Penguin disruptor, and now you have the gadget you need to progress further with the line launcher. And the next sequences are really cool where Batman's starting to get a lot weaker due to his illness, and like the Metroidvania aspects here are nice. You want to take out these guys, you can do it the old-fashioned way or blow up the ceiling above them. You get a nice Predator section, and after, you start going to Wonder City, which is a spectacle in itself, where you now have to scan these robots, and then you have access to Ra's al Ghul's hideout, and then you do his trials into a boss fight. It's all really well done in my opinion. It's a neat section that really advances the story and gives more insight into Batman and his character, especially with Talia. It's really cool. I like this section. I'm going to give this section Pattinson tier. It was really cool to just go through all these trials and the Metroidvania road to it and get rewarded with the cool boss fight. It was all awesome. Don't think it quite reaches the levels of like the Penguin Iceberg Lounge, but it's still really good. Next up is Wonder Tower, which I think honestly is kind of mid. Now, Wonder Tower, I think, starts here where you have to enter the side of the area, traverse through the sewers, and then get to the elevator where you climb up to Hugo Strange's area filled with tiger guards. Okay, as far as the section goes, it just feels redundant since you go back to the areas you went to previously, and it's just not really interesting spectacle-wise. You just kind of climb up this building, and when you compare this locale here to something like the Iceberg Lounge, to me it's like night and day. There's not much here that is honestly memorable, and because of that, I really don't like it. It has a cool story element for sure, though, like when Hugo Strange dies and Batman and Rage jump out of the building. That was awesome. But as far as quality goes in terms of level design, it's just kind of boring to me. Pretty forgettable. For that, I'm going to put this in mid tier. I do think the story beats are cool, which is really the only reason it's in mid tier and not lower. Now, the next dungeon area I'd say is actually in the DLC, which is Harley Quinn's Revenge. Now look, I'm just going to say this. A lot of the game's DLCs just have Kevin Conroy level designs. Harley Quinn's Revenge is no exception. Just due to the sheer heftiness of it, I mean, this DLC is all one big dungeon, right? It's one humongous area to traverse filled with everything that makes an Arkham game great. Stealth, combat, puzzles, a neat story, it's all in this DLC. So for Harley Quinn's Revenge, I'd say this dungeon is pretty easily Kevin Conroy tier. There's not much to say, right? I mean, I kind of find it unfair because of how it has this advantage of being DLC, but whatever, it's Kevin Conroy tier. And those are the rankings for Arkham City. Now, there's a lot of areas in Arkham City, like the old GCPD building, the church, the courthouse. Places like that I didn't include because they're not really dungeons. They're more so small areas, right? So keep that in mind. I said that in the beginning of the video, but I thought I'd say it here as well. Okay, but cool. Let's move on to the next game. Batman Arkham Oranges. Now, this game had some... Let's just get into it. Okay, so the first section is the beginning of the game, actually, Blackgate. So this is like the first tutorial area for the game. This Blackgate section is pretty good. I mean, it's a good tutorial area, and it has a pretty challenging boss fight, all things considered, for being like the very beginning area, right? But for a main tutorial area, I think this game had the best one in the series. The introduction was great. The places you go through were all really interesting. There were nice little puzzles and Metroidvania aspects you kind of had to go through. And the narrative with Killer Croc and Batman escaping the GCPD was pretty entertaining. The story hooks you here. For being the best intro to any Arkham game in my opinion, I'm putting this in Batson tier. I think it did a great job. I know this picture here is from Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate, like the DS game, but just think of it as the Blackgate section for the main Batman Arkham Origins game. Just do that. And I know Blackgate returns in this game's finale, but I will judge that one separately and put it on the tier list differently because it's a completely new area of Blackgate that's not really connected to the beginning of Blackgate in the beginning of this game, right? So I think it deserves its own tier. Now, next up is the final offer ship, and I absolutely love the final offer ship, man. Jeez. This area was really awesome, and let me tell you why. First of all, getting inside is pretty cool, as you have to take on one of the first real Predator sections that is honestly unique in the fact that the layout is pretty different than usual rooms. It's right outside the ship with crates and a sniper looking out, and there's no gargoyles, like you kind of have to just play it different. And once you get inside, it's kind of cool to navigate, going through these little puzzle areas, and once you do all of that, you get one of the most iconic Arkham scenes with the Electrocutioner, and on top of that, you traverse through really interesting areas right after, including all these interconnecting rooms with one leading you to the next into this really big drapery room that's really well designed. There's just little things too, like Penguin having these cases on display with him talking about each of them. It's really awesome. And at the end of it all, you get what I think is one of the best boss fights in the series with Deathstroke. I just think the level design that went into this final offer ship, coupled with a really engaging narrative, awesome Metroidvania elements, and overall just being entertaining to traverse through, I'm gonna easily put this in Kevin Conroy's tier. This is a really well designed dungeon in my opinion. I loved it. Moving on to the next dungeon of the game though, which is GCPD. And once again, I really love this dungeon. Now this dungeon sticks out to me because it's kind of different from other sections of Arkham games, right? It's just the idea. It's really cool that Batman is sneaking into a police station where all the cops are pretty much out to get him. And I don't know, that whole idea is really cool. This dungeon feels different in that sense. And GCPD itself is really well made in my opinion. You just do classic Batman things like access the building in an unconventional way, sneak around on elevator shafts, air vents, going above cops and hiding. There's this notorious section here where you're supposed to sneak past all these armed cops, but you can fight them, which is awesome. There's a lot of Metroidvania and puzzle sections here. The narrative here is really cool, especially when Batman meets Barbara and also talks with Gordon at the end. It's all cool. You can see how corrupt these cops are when you listen in on some of the conversations or how they're beating on these homeless people with nowhere to go. The atmosphere of Gotham is really set in stone here, and the whole section of the game is just a treat to go through. I know sneaking around these cops are pretty much scripted, like you can't really get caught, but like I said, the whole idea is cool. And with the cool narrative and amazing level design, this is another Kevin Conroy tier. I love this section of the game, and I wish we got more stuff like this. Now, the next dungeon of the game, I would say, is the sewers. And now for Arkham Origins, I'm grouping all the sewer sections together. You go through these areas a few times. Like, you go down there to find out what happened at Lacey Towers. You go through there to get inside the autopsy room, and you also go in there to access Bane's secret hideout. I'm putting them together because overall, I think between all these missions, the dungeon is kind of a mid between all these areas. Like, when you compare this to other sections I just gushed about, I don't know, it's hard for me. Like, it wasn't that fun trying to get to Bane's hideout or to the autopsy report. Trying to get to the computers to find out what happened at Lacey Towers was alright, but it wasn't memorable to me. While these areas had Metroidvania-esque designs, overall, I don't find them really memorable. It's not dog water, but I don't know, I wouldn't say it's that good. I think overall, they're kind of mid. So that's why I'm grouping all these together and putting them here. There's not much else to say. Well, actually, the narrative when Batman pieces everything together at Lacey Towers is really awesome. It's one of the best parts, but I don't think it salvages the dungeon aspect, unfortunately. Moving on, though, we have Sionis Industries, which they made pretty different than the one in Arkham City, which is cool. Now, this dungeon, I thought was just that, just cool. It felt pretty standard as far as Arkham dungeons go, right? The beginning is all pretty standard. It was cool trying to get to this laptop, and the whole thing with Copperhead stalking you was pretty interesting. There are nice sections like this one here that had both combat and puzzle parts to it. The underground Janus Cosmetics area was pretty cool with the Predator section. The layout just felt pretty standard though, which isn't really a bad thing because I still liked it, but there was nothing here that stood out to me in that area like the other ones. I do love the narrative here though. Batman beating on Roman Sionis, and then Copperhead coming out of nowhere, which shifts the scene into this obligatory Batman hallucinating scene because it wouldn't be an Arkham game without a hallucinating scene. The story in this area was pretty cool. I liked it, but just like the layout here, there's nothing here that really wowed me. But it wasn't mid to me either. I think this dungeon is the definition of pretty good. Nothing too crazy, but overall, it was a welcome addition to the game. Next up, we have the Gotham Royal Hotel, and oh my god, this section was just outstanding. I loved it. Now, the Gotham Royal Hotel, I think, might be the best dungeon in the entire series to me. Now, if it looks like I'm biased, it's because I think I am. I don't know, it's my list, but I really think the hotel had the best dungeon that I guess isn't DLC. The area is massive. It's filled with great Predator rooms, awesome combat sections. There's a lot of Metroidvania puzzle design, like having to go inside these elevator shafts, amazing visuals, a whole Joker section where you go inside this clown room area he's made, a lot of interconnecting rooms and great visuals, and on top of all of that, amazing, and I mean amazing story beats. Batman saving Joker, Bane against Batman, I mean, these moments to me were unforgettable, and the fact that those moments are here in one of the most well-designed dungeons in the series makes it that much better. There's other cool moments too, like Batman realizing that Joker is built different and having to jump out of this window because of the bomb. And I didn't even talk about the villain meeting here. The villain's meeting was really cool. That was an amazing scene. All of that was really cool, and I think it's easily earned its spot to make this a goated area of the game. The Gotham Royal Hotel section is like easily Kevin Conroy tier. I love this area. Next up, we have the Pioneer Bridge dungeon, where you under the bridge you have to defuse all the bombs and save the hostages. I think this dungeon is simply pretty good. There's a standard area where you have to climb up this elevator shaft and go through different sections to defuse bombs. There's Predator rooms here, like this one here, which is a little bit more difficult as there's no gargoyles to save you, which I do like. And I do think the whole narrative of trying to fight against Firefly while Gordon is being an asshole toward you is pretty engaging. I think overall, the section did a pretty good job. Nothing that outright blow me away, but I don't think it's boring either. I'd say overall this goes in DCAMU tier. Pretty good. Not too bad, all things considered. Next area of the game is the finale of the game, which is the Blackgate 2 section. Now, this section is a pretty much new area from the beginning Blackgate mission. I think the layout of this section is pretty standard. The beginning is a little bit more intricate with having to navigate underground with the water and electricity, but after that, it's pretty much just going room to room, fighting waves of enemies until you get to the game's final boss fight and finale. Overall, I'd say this final area is just pretty good, just because the beginning is pretty cool. But the rest of the dungeon is kind of meh, but the game's finale is also amazing. The final boss is really well done in my opinion with Bane, and I think the game is wrapped up nicely with Joker. The dungeon itself could be better, but I think what brings this up are all the pluses that I mentioned, and because of that, this is going in DCAMU tier. Overall, pretty good. Moving on though, we have the DLC, which is Cold Heart, which offers 2 new areas I consider dungeons, Wayne Manor and Gothcorp. Now I'm just going to talk about Gothcorp first. I'm going to put Gothcorp in S, right? Like Harley Quinn's Revenge, it's just a massive sprawling area that's full of everything that makes a dungeon great. Great story, great predator sections and combat sections, especially with the ice theme. There's a good ending here. And I mean, what else is there really to say? It was a hefty DLC. Gothcorp was just great, S tier. Wayne Manor though was also really cool. First of all, the locale is great. You get to explore Wayne Manor, which is sick. And you get to do the classic go in the Batcave from Wayne Manor and put on your Batsuit. It was awesome. There were unique sections you had to do, like as Bruce Wayne, like this Predator room here, and overall, it was a good dungeon. I don't want to spend too much time on the DLC dungeons because they have that unfair advantage, but yeah, this one is going in Banson's here. It's not the level of these other dungeons, but it's still really good and I liked it a lot. And those are the dungeons for Arkham Oranges. I think this game overall had the best dungeons, and I might be biased because this game had my favorite story, but you know what? Who cares? It's my list, so there. Let's move on to the final game though. Next up, we have Arkham Knight, which despite being the biggest game in terms of map and scale, had like the fewest real actual dungeons, which is kind of funny to me. To start, we have Ace Chemicals, which I think is an excellent first dungeon in the game. I think this section had a really good mix of both Batmobile and Batman sections. The setting was awesome, and I really like how this level design had a lot of freedom in a sense. Getting to kind of pick some areas first and how to go about them. It wasn't completely like you had all this freedom, but it felt like that to an extent, right? And like I said, it's a really great balance with the Batmobile and playing as Batman, and the narrative here was cool. Seeing the Arkham Knight for the first time was sweet, and the tunnel section was well done. Overall, I'd say this was a great first dungeon to explore, and it's just kind of a shame we can't go back to it after. I don't think it's on the level of Kevin Conroy's here, even with the insane Joker reveal and the story narrative, but I do think it's awesome. It's a Pattinson tier for sure. Next up, we have Stag Airship. So Stag's airships I'm going to put in pretty good tier. It had a unique way of getting through the airships by dragging these crates around as well as having to hop between the airships. I think overall it had a really nice theme as going inside a blimp in Gotham City. It's just really cool since there always seems to be blimps above the city. The areas had nice combat predator sections, and the narrative here was pretty engaging, especially at the end when you meet up with Scarecrow. But for me, there was nothing really to wow me, but there was nothing bad about it either. I enjoyed this section. I thought it was a nice section in the game. I put it in DCAMU tier. It was pretty good. Not too much else beyond that though to really blow it out of the park. Next up, we have the Panessa Studios section, which story-wise I didn't really like. Like the whole Joker infection thing was just kind of boring to me, all things considered. But outside of that, I really liked the layout and dungeon design here. It reminded me of the Iceberg Lounge and it felt way more like classic Arkham. You have 3 kind of lanes ultimately to go and get all the Joker people from, all with different sections gameplay wise, from Predator rooms with Robin to then a combat room with Robin to then an awesome singing Mark Hamill puzzle section. It was so cool. It was a nice change of pace and the variety here is really good. It was a nice dual play section with Robin, in which I wish there were more of dual play sections. Also, it was just a really nice setting with it being a movie studio, so it visually looked all great. The layout, like I said, was good. I honestly put this in Banson tier. I liked it. It's a nice level design. It's really sick, but the story was pretty meh, except for the Jason Todd flashbacks. Those were really good. But the rest of the story here wasn't that great, so overall, Banson tier. Next up, we have the Arkham Knight headquarters. You know, the place with a giant drill and all those levels you had to go down. Okay, so for this dungeon, I didn't really like it. The level design was one that didn't really resonate with me. It gets kind of annoying going lower and lower on each level. Like this part where you have to drag the drill with the Batmobile felt unnecessary, and overall, I didn't really enjoy the idea they were going for here with the differing levels. I can appreciate the concept, sure, but like in execution, I didn't find it very fun, nor do I really look forward to this part, so I think this goes in mid tier. Also, this is irrelevant, but collecting Riddler trophies in this section is a pain in the ass. I think the narrative here is pretty cool, which is why it's not dog water tier, but yeah, it's just Bane tier. Okay, but for the Arkham Knight DLCs, because some of the Arkham Knight DLCs do have dungeons, I'm grouping Killer Croc and Ra's al Ghul's side missions together because my points apply to both of these side missions. They're pretty good dungeons, but they're a bit too short for my liking, nor was it really challenging. The narratives on both sides were good, and there were still interesting puzzle designs on both sides that made it fun for a bit to go through, and for that, both of these are going in pretty good tier. I just wish these were longer. Moving on to the Arkham episodes, Harley's DLC where you go to Bloodhaven's police department. I mean, the whole DLC here is this building, but it technically does count as a dungeon. As far as layouts go, it's pretty standard, and it fits Harley's traversal pretty well. However, the narrative here is pretty ass. It's not really that engaging, and the way Nightwing loses is dumb too. I hate it. I don't want to dwell on this one too much. I'd say it's just pretty good. Despite it being the entire DLC worth of a dungeon, it's not a long DLC, and it wasn't that amazing story-wise, all things considered, but it's still fun. I just put it in pretty good tier. The next DLC that had a dungeon was Tim's with the Two-Face area. This one's also going in pretty good tier. There was nothing about it that blew me away. You did have pretty unique puzzles and honestly some pretty interesting traversing, but overall it wasn't too long. And at the end of the day, it just felt like a new place to explore, nothing much to wow me. So I'm putting this in pretty good tier as well. And that's it for Arkham Knight. Matter of Family, I think it didn't really have a dungeon. I mean, I guess some sections had puzzle areas and stuff, but you know what I mean? The puzzles were more so throughout the map. There were no real dungeons in that area, I'd say, so I'm not counting that. So, that wraps it up. That is my tier list for the dungeons in the Arkham games. Now, these were the areas I considered to actually be dungeons. Everything else felt too small for me to be considered a dungeon, or maybe some other reason, but if there is one I should have put, let me know in the comments. I put a lot in pretty good tier, didn't I? But you know what? Some of them are just basic and good, but what do you want me to do? Like, lie? Like, that's how I feel about the dungeon, but you let me know what you think about this list and what you disagree with. I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of differing opinions, but that's the beauty of it, right? So let me know your thoughts, please. I'm actually very curious. And on top of that, make sure to subscribe, like, share, anything like that helps. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Stay safe and peace.